Okay, this is case study 4. My name is a little bit about the client. A little bit about the client. The client is a 3-year-old female. She is diagnosed with autism, and she receives ABA services from 9 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. The client is not in school. The client is nonverbal, and she is working with a PECS book, and her behaviors are crying, whining, eloping, grabbing, pulling at others' face, hair, or items. The behavior of concern that we are going to be looking at is grabbing or pulling on others' face, clothing, or hair, or items. This is operationally defined by any instance of the client wrapping her fingers around another person's clothing, hair, or face, or any other items. For example, if a therapist pauses a YouTube video, the client wraps their fingers around the therapist's hairs and pulls. Another example is the client grabbing at the therapist's hair and pulling down. Another potential example is the client grabbing at another peer's food without permission. A non-example would be the client grabbing an item offered by another peer or adult, so that is with permission. Another non-example would include the client grabbing the therapist's arm after losing balance and potentially being at risk of falling. Let's talk a little bit about response class, especially in terms of this behavior. Response class is defined as a group of responses of varying topography, all of which produce the same effect on the environment, as defined by Cooper et al. 2020. For instance, a response class may be where if someone is seeking attention, you would do this in a couple different ways. You could scream, you could yell out a person's name, you could tap someone on the shoulder. In this case, for the client engages in grabbing or pulling at others' face, clothing, or items or hair in order to access attention or have access to tangibles. For example, if a therapist is looking down at their phone, the client will engage in grabbing at the therapist's face or at the phone. Another example would be the client engaging at grabbing at another peer's food or items when hungry, so they are grabbing and trying to access those tangibles. Before we get into the intervention portion, let's talk about rule-governed behavior. Rule-governed behavior is behavior that occurs due to contact with rules that describe contingencies and not due to prior contact with the contingencies the rule describes, as defined by Skinner, 1969. So, therefore, a person can follow a rule without ever having contacted or had exposure to the contingencies that it describes. This is taken from Tarbox et al. 2011. So for instance, if you see a no trespassing sign, you would not enter because you know that you could have potential law risks if you were to. You don't have to actually trespass and be arrested in order to know that. That is a rule-governed behavior. Another instance may be that you do not eat a poisonous mushroom because you know from rule-governed behavior that you might get sick or die. The intervention in place for this behavior is teaching the client to mand with point. What this means is that if the client engages in grabbing or pulling at others' face, clothing, hair, or items, we are going to have the client mand using their pointer finger instead. In order to do this, we will teach with least to most prompting. So therefore, if the client grabs at the therapist's face after the therapist pauses a YouTube video, the therapist will ask the client, "What do you want?" and then model pointing to the YouTube video. When the client points to the YouTube video, then the therapist will press play. If the therapist models a point, and the client does not comply and imitate that model, then a hand over hand or partial physical, first partial physical and then hand over hand prompt will be used in order to teach that manned with point. In this way, we are teaching the client those rule governed behaviors that once they do manned with a point, they will receive that item or receive that attention that they are looking for.